Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Demand Forecasting and Consumer Trends in the Pandemic and Beyond. Our webinar is organized by Singular Intelligence, a company based in London focused on artificial intelligence solutions for consumer goods and retail sector. Singular Intelligence is backed by Oxford University and Innovate UK and have customers such as Unilever and Sainsbury and are a global partner of Nielsen. We move to the agenda for today. We will have three speakers that I will present later on. The first presentation by Russell Sylvester will talk about how to understand the drivers of retail performance in the current UK COVID landscape. Then Dr. Nath will discuss next about handling the complexities of consumer behavior with the research on healthy eating that were amplified during the pandemic. And finally, Sarvesh Kumar will present how we can find solutions to the new challenges in uncertain times by building capabilities around artificial intelligence and better understanding the consumer trends and the ability to improve demand forecasting. I'm the chair of today. My name is Corneliu Vilsan, and on the next slide you will see my position as well. I'm the CEO of FE Marketing, a marketing consultancy specialized on strategic marketing and marketing effectiveness based in Paris. I have more than 20 years in C-level positions, both in consumer goods sector with Johnson & Johnson, Pernod Ricard, and others, as well as B2B with Schneider Electric. And in my recently published book, Phronesis Marketing, that you can see on the screen, I am describing the kind of challenges that businesses face, especially in a post-pandemic world, with a special focus on marketing effectiveness. Some of them will be discussed today. Phronesis Marketing is available on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble. In the next slide, we'll see the three speakers for today. Sarvesh Kumar is the founder and CEO of Singular Intelligence that I spoke previously. It is an artificial intelligence and data innovation entrepreneur. Dr. Nath is a retail academic expert, director of research at University of Northumbria, and Russell Sylvester is a retail industry expert, European market leader at Connect Partner Network, Nielsen IQ. Some technical details before we start the first presentation. The webinar is recorded. It will last 1 hour. And you will receive the presentation afterwards. If you have any questions, please use the chat function. You can see at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer the questions at the end. So today our first speaker is Russell Sylvester from Nielsen IQ. Russell, the floor is yours. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So I'd just like to take you through a 10-minute walk around what's happened in the last year and what we think is going to happen going forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so the summary of 2020. So we've not had a year like it before. So the first person in the UK was diagnosed with COVID in February. We moved to lockdown in March. Homeschooling started. Personally, it was great fun for me, not. Online reaches a new high of 14%. The lockdown is then lifted. Children go back to school. Pubs and restaurants reopen. Eat out to help out, staycations. Then schools go back again in September. And then we started to see some localized regions with circuit breakers, Halloween subdued, and then the start of lockdown 2.0 with a national tier system. Pubs must serve a meal, and then Christmas was basically cancelled because we were in full lockdown. Next slide, please. So again, there's going to be more external factors again facing the FMCG in the next 18 months. So we've still got COVID hanging around. We've just had increases in the Indian variant, and there's some local surge testing, which could lead to localized lockdown again, and potentially could lead to further lockdowns. Hopefully not, but that's, we can't rule that out. We've also got Brexit. So that's a whole webinar in itself, so I won't go into too much detail on it, but we've got Brexit coming forward where we're trying to sign trade deals and businesses are just trying to get used to it in the new world. Unemployment levels have slightly improved, but potentially they could go down again. And we've just seen this morning that inflation has gone up to 1.7%, which will also have an impact. And then also things that are government-led initiatives, so the HFSS, which is the high fat, salt and sugar restrictions, are going to be coming into place soon. So there's a lot going on in the next 18 months. So just to give you a view, so in 2020, the FMCG business grew by 9.2%, which was fantastic for the retail industry. You can see there around April where the value in the units kind of becomes decoupled, and that's where supermarkets were pulling back on promotions, especially multi-buys, because they were having enough trouble getting in stock as it is without having the additional pressure of fulfilling multi-buys and promotions. Online sales grew by 79% as well. Next slide, please. So what's going to be next? What's next for retail? So this is what happens. So we think online is going to hit 15% share, which is 2 years earlier than we first predicted, and that's pre-COVID. What we've seen is that demand has increased by 57% for online shopping, and you can see an additional 3.4 million households are new to online in 2020, and this led to retailers having to be very creative, increase their capacity. So capacity increased by 128%, and a lot of this was done by turning stores into warehouse fulfillment centres. And then claim behaviour from our panelists is that 47% of households will continue to shop as they are, if not more, over the next 6 months. And I think one of the big changes that have happened is the explosion of the apps. What's happened is online shopping has traditionally been big baskets once a week, maybe once every other week, but now there's this niche market for smaller baskets and immediate fulfillment, and this is where these apps are coming into their own. The high street recovery is also, it's not guaranteed, and out of town will feel the drag of online because it's the big stores that generally do the fulfillment, and for a shopper to make a long journey to one of the out of town stores, the drag and pull of doing their shop online is greater than it was before. Lack of footfall on the high street has impacted the specialists, such as cosmetics. They've also turned, so Lush is an example, they've turned their stores into mini distribution centres. Iceland has driven fantastic growth, and Tesco, Sainsbury's and Asda's are looking to continue with partnerships as they expand. And some of these partnerships are, next slide please. So Morrison's and Amazon are teamed up, Tesco's and Yo have teamed up, Sainsbury's have also got Argos and now Patisserie Valerie. Asda also working with Accessorize and Decathlon because they've got these large stores now and they realise they can use these as almost like a mini distribution centre, and if they can get more brands on board, then they can make it more cost effective. So what does this mean for in-store? So 82% of occasions are with a loyalty card, and that's from Sainsbury's, Tesco's and Co-op card holders from our panelists. 23% of shoppers say that retail loyalty promotions are really important to them. And then what we've seen as well is the increase in mobile apps. So instead of it just being a card, they're now trying to move people over to apps. So you've got Scan and Go, we've got the little one, and the good thing about moving from a card to an app is that makes it far easier for the retailer to provide personalized, targeted couponing. So instead of just having coupons through the post, which may have had an element of targeting, this now can be fairly immediate. If you log onto the store's Wi-Fi, they know you're in store and they can target you straight away. So it really is a great opportunity for personalized offers to try and drive footfall back into store. And what we're seeing in stores, there's a big range reduction happening, and I think some of that was obviously forced by COVID and some supply issues, but I think what's happened is retailers have taken this opportunity to reset, and what we're seeing is there's a big reduction in terms of the number of SKUs that are now launched. NPD was down 15%, unsurprisingly. So what we're thinking is there's going to be fewer innovations, but they're going to have to work harder in value. And the other thing as well is that because shoppers are not spending as much time in store, so they want to get out as quick as possible, they're not having the opportunity to browse like they did before. And also, you know, when you're in a store now, you don't want to get too close to anybody. And if someone stood in front of a 4-foot mod of shelving, you only wait so long before you move on. So it is making it harder for shoppers to be aware of NPD. Next slide, please. So the government are going to continue to have an impact. So the single-use plastic ban, packaging tax, and labelling. The high-fat sugar and salt promotions cut, I'll come on to that in a bit more. And also, we've already discussed Brexit will have a massive impact on the price of goods. So what's next for shoppers? So not so much of a reset, but it's going to be shaped by personal wealth. So depending how people are, how they are financially. Some people have done very well personally out of COVID. Some people not so well. So it's all about, how they're feeling. Also, it's about health and concerns. So will consumer confidence increase? Will they feel easier in store? Would they start making more trips than they did before? So that's one to look for. Next slide, please. So HFS, so what we're going to see here is that the HFS categories are not going to be able to have prominent places in store. They're not going to have secondary space. Promotions and multi-buys are going to be curtailed. Next slide, please. And then you can just see that how reliant on promotion some of these categories are. So in chocolate, 50.8% are sold on promotion, with 20.7% sales off shelf. Sweet biscuits 42, and you can read the rest of soft drinks, for example. So that's going to have a massive impact within store. So there's going to be potentially more promotional space available to non-HFSS categories. And then finally, so this is just a survey from our panelists. So 92% of our panelists are concerned about health going forward. And that's increased year on year, unsurprisingly, because of the COVID situation. And then 34% of our panelists say that sustainability is important to them. Now, I just want to point out this is claimed behaviour. So we've done a similar exercise last year for the State of the Nation, and we were able to match the respondents to say they were worried about sustainability, but they still went on and bought single-use plastic water bottles. So just bear in mind, I think any change that we're going to do based on sustainability has to be at no additional cost to the consumer, and it will have to be manufacturer and retailer led. As in, if we want people to buy less in plastic bottles, then we're going to have to find a way of, using glass or aluminium, for example, instead of plastic bottles. We need to drive that. And that's it from me. So thank you very much for your time. Any questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you very much, Russell. It's indeed impressive, the growth of e-commerce in a market like UK, where e-commerce was already one of the highest in Europe. And our next speaker is Dr. Nath from the University of Northumbria. Dr. Nath, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cornelius, and good morning, everyone. The previous speaker, Russell, has explained to us that what are the key changes that are happening in the marketplace, the macro factors that are changing rapidly. What I'm going to do is, in my talk, I'm going to talk about the reasons or the causes that are driving those changes. Now, one of the key changes which Russell has mentioned is the focus on health. Now, if you think of, of course, it is not surprising that during a pandemic time, people will be more concerned about their health. So it's not surprising at all. But even if you think of a major news which came out yesterday, the news was around 1 million of people who were hospitalized in the last 1 year. And the reason behind that hospitalization is being overweight, being obese. So you see that although we are talking about COVID a lot, so the pandemic and the COVID a lot, but perhaps the health issue, the being overweight, being obese, they are much bigger pandemic, or they are much bigger epidemic, which is there in every part of the world. So I'm going to focus more on the health aspect, and mainly focusing on the healthy eating aspect. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to start with one example. Can you please play the video, please?
Still think about pizza. Still get to eat it too. Still think about pizza. When you thought pizza couldn't get any better.
WW Weight Watchers Reimagined. Try WW today with the...
Right, that's fine. So I'm sure like many of you are familiar with this advert, okay? Like there's a series of advert from WW, which is Weight Watcher, starring James Corden. If you carefully notice what he is saying, that I am losing weight, but at the same time, I haven't changed any of my lifestyle. So I can eat pizza whenever I want. I can eat whatever I want. I can eat whenever I want. So I am still losing my weight without changing my lifestyle. And why I'm doing that? Because he has said, if you look at the slide, because I care about my children, I care about my family. Now, if you think of, if this is the story which WW is trying to portray, I'm sure like you will understand that there is a significant chunk in the population who have very similar physiological profile like James Corden, who are slightly overweight or obese, etc. And at the same time, they have very similar psychological profile like him, that they would like to reduce weight, but they would not like to change their behavior. They would not like to change their eating habit. Okay, so if this is a significant proportion of the population, and the statistics which I quoted at the beginning, that last year 1 million people got hospitalized because of obesity. So if you think of that, this is a big segment of the population, and as a policymaker, as a food regulator, or as a food manufacturer, we have a social responsibility to take care of our consumers. We have to take care about their benefits, okay? So we have to take care about their welfare. So it is very important for us to understand what exactly we can do about this segment of the population who would like to reduce their weight, but at the same time, they would not like to change their eating habit. Next slide, please. Now, in order to help the consumers, the food regulators, the policymakers, and the manufacturers, they are working together. Now, if you want to buy an item like granola, then you have many choices, okay? Like there are many information sources from where you can get the information that you need to make the correct food choice decision. For example, if you look at the back of the slide where you have the detailed nutrition fact. Now, the problem is, of course, this kind of information, that the full details of nutrition fact is very, very important, and it should be given. But different brand use this in a different way. So as I said, some brand would say that 100 gram of my product contain X gram of fat and X gram of Y gram of saturated fat. Whereas some other brand, what they would say is, one portion size of my product contains X amount of fat and Y amount of saturated fat. So you see that in a busy supermarket context, it's not very easy for every consumer who are in a hurry to compare across brand, to read all this information, and then make the correct decision about their food choice. So this might be quite confusing for a significant proportion of consumer. The question is, do consumers really make a note of all these three levels of information as I explained? Do they really understand the complexity that is there in the information? Do they really have the ability to comprehend this complex information in a busy supermarket setting or in the online setting? That is something that we do not know. Okay, the answer to that question is not very clear. And at the same time, when I explained that James Corden example, So basically, he's representing a significant portion of our population, as I said, who are overweight, who are obese, but would like to reduce their weight without making any changes to their food habit. So our second question is, do this particular segment of the population who are overweight or who are obese, do they really make notice of all these information facts which are there in the package? This is something, again, which is we do not know. Now, why it is important for us to understand that all these questions? Perhaps, as I said, that which Russell has said before, that health concern is again of principal is a principal factor that is going to drive our consumption habit, that is going to drive our future buying habit, and definitely this is going to have an impact on our business performance. So if I'm the manager of a company and if I'm into food manufacturing, definitely we have to understand that yes, we are trying to help our consumers by providing them with lots of information, lots of nutrition fact, but is it really working? So to understand this, what we did was we conducted a consumer experiment where we called a group of consumers and then exposed them to various kind of all these nutrition labeling, okay, starting from the full detailed nutrition fact to those overall information like excellent source of fiber. And then we also chose all the products which generally people would buy or would consume on a regular basis, like breakfast cereal. So we expose consumers to these kind of information, and then we ask them, how are you able to understand this information? How you are using this information to make the correct food choice, because they want to reduce their weight, they want to stay healthy because of this pandemic which is around. And is it really making sense? But surprisingly, what we found was that the result was completely opposite. The overweight consumers or the obese consumers, they rarely make a note of all these information, okay? So they do not really bother about this information. On the contrary, consumers who are normal weight or people who have normal BMI, according to NHS, for example, so people who are normal weight, who do not have the urgency to lose their weight by changing their food style, they take care of this information much more critically. So you see, all the good intention of the policymaker or all the good intention of the manufacturer is sometimes is not producing the result that we expected. It is becoming futile, and sometimes it can become even counterproductive. So that's the first finding that we got. The second finding that we got was the segment of the population who are overweight, who are obese, when they find a food which is being promoted as a healthy variant, okay, like a low-fat chicken tikka, for example. Now, when they eat a food which is promoted as a as a healthy variant, then they increase their portion size, which means they overeat those food. And if they overeat those food, down the line, what is going to happen is they are not going to lose weight, and then they are going to keep on becoming more and more overweight. So as I said, it does not serve the purpose as intended by the policymaker or as intended by the manufacturer. So now you see that why we are discussing all these things, because we have to understand what is going on in consumers' mind, and that is going to be reflected on their buying pattern. That is going to be reflected on all the facts and figures which the previous speaker has shown, and that's going to influence our business performance. So can we move to the next slide, please? Now, this is something I have already discussed. So next slide. Right. So we have to understand that why it is happening, why we are not getting the result that we expected. The first reason that we found out was something called the social distance. Now, if you think of the health food is often perceived as less tasty. So the example which I gave, if you buy a low sugar biscuit, for example, or a low sugar chocolate, then most people would think that this is not as tasty as a regular chocolate. So we have in our mind that the healthy version or the healthy variant is not as tasty as the regular version. And secondly, if we do not find people around us in our immediate social circle adopting this kind of a product, then what we are going to do is, in our mind, we are going to develop something like not for me mindset. So we are going to keep away from this kind of a healthy variant of the product. And this is something which we are calling as social distance. But more importantly, there is another factor. Like when you eat a healthy variant, say for example, I switch to Weight Watcher shepherd's pie, which is low fat, low sugar, etc. Now, if I switch to Weight Watcher shepherd's pie, it does not mean that next day I'm going to lose 500 grams of my weight. I have to keep on eating this over a period of time, maybe 3 months, maybe 4 months, maybe 6 months, before I can see any kind of benefit of switching my consumption habit or moving to the more healthy variant. So the concept of here and now is not present in case of the healthy variant. And this is something that we call as the temporal distance. So these are the things which are happening in consumers' mind. And together, social distance and temporal distance together, they are creating something which we call as psychological distance. So basically, this is a barrier which is there in consumers' mind, barrier to adopt the healthy variant because they don't find any reason to adopt the healthy variant. And that is causing a disengagement with the product. So at the beginning, I said of my presentation that yes, health is an important concept. We have to educate our consumers to eat healthily because we have to reduce weight. This obesity, etc., is a big problem in the country. But what we see is all those good intentions are falling flat. Next slide, please. Now, I won't go into further details on what should be done. Perhaps this is something that you have to think about, and you can keep this as a food for thought for future when you are working on your, say, consumer strategy, on your product development strategy, and so on. So if you are a food manufacturer, what should be done? How we can educate our consumers? Of course, we can give all the 3 levels of information on the product packaging. But as I said, it is not working for everyone. It is not working in the context that we want it to work for people who are more vulnerable, who want to reduce weight. It is not working for them. So what should be done? So this is something that you have to keep in mind. And secondly, if you are not a food manufacturer, all of us are consumer. So what can help us to make the correct choice? Okay, so you have to think about, if I am a consumer, I want to reduce weight, I want to eat healthily, what kind of information can help me to make the right choice? So that is where I would stop, and thank you for paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nath. May I remind you, if you have any questions, please use the chat function, and we will answer all the questions at the end. Next speaker is Sarvesh Kumar from Singular Intelligence. Sarvesh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Nath and Russell, for outlining so clearly the market and the consumer psychology aspects. Omer, if you can move to the next slide. It became very clear that the aspects of consumer psychology are more important to add to the data and the modeling technology to bring about how a certain trigger impacts consumer behavior and therefore market performance. So I am going to take 3 key aspects of what we have just discussed this morning. One is that there is shifting consumer preference in product choice, channels, formats, and consumer consumption patterns, as we have seen in all the data that is coming in since the beginning of 2020 and what we are seeing in 2021 as well, disrupting marketing plans, supply chain plans, availability of products, and so on. There are key drivers of consumer behavior in the pandemic, other than the consumer psychology aspect that we have just learned that must be looked at carefully and integrated into analysis. There is the growth of pandemic, or it's coming down, mobility restrictions or it's easing, the health concerns that we just spoke about, and of course government policies like HFSS that came up in Russell's presentation, that they all come together other than the traditional drivers of weather, macroeconomic indicators, which are also becoming no less important, and other aspects in driving what we buy, how we buy, where we buy it from. And therefore, category level predictions and forecasts are no longer relevant. If online is gaining prominence, or out of town is gaining prominence for a certain type of product, or certain formats are being now bought more because of the in-home consumption or consumer segments around locations, then they all need to be understood. Finally, we just saw that consumer behavior is complex. So there can be various scenarios of evolving demand in market, and we need to understand that for reliable, effective business planning and decisions. Next slide, Omid. We took a lot of data as part of our work in singular intelligence with the data from Nielsen as well as customers. And we built a new technology, which is now protected with patent, is to drive out latent consumer preferences from market data about category sales and many other external data factors that Russ outlined that have become a lot more important today. And this, what you see in the box is the onset of pandemic and beyond, and you can see how for different products, consumer preferences have changed. So this is what would reflect in parallel on category sales or channel sales or format sales for that particular format or category or channel, and therefore market performance. So it became very clear that finding out consumer preference is key. It's core. Next slide, please. And so organizations now need to develop a complete capability using data and AI and advanced analytics to understand, anticipate, adapt, and respond to these market events in consumer behavior, detect market anomaly in advance, understand consumer trends, and they don't mean an aggregate high level overview. They can be very granular, specific to products, specific to channels, locations, with all the external data that is there. They can be short term and long term, and which can then be used for building scenarios of demand, which can then finally be used for optimization, whether you do it for price, promo, or other marketing interventions, which can then be used for personalization, and working together with suppliers and partners for collaborative fulfillment, which is the core to perform better and revival of industry. So we'll go to the next, a couple of things, further details. How do you get that? We observed by analysis of data that there is insight and leading indicators in external data. A selection of food products and their search patterns clearly show variability and correlation with COVID spread and lockdown. And I'll come to that later a bit. Again, brand share of sales correlates with brand share of search, and there is a distance between both of them, enough for you to detect a change in pattern and plan for that in advance. Next slide, please. So we built a new technology, a new solution where we use internal and external market data, COVID, retail mobility, and other types of mobility of consumer weather, and everything coming together, as you can see, to detect consumer preferences at a level of granularity which is needed by newly built patented technology that we have. And we take this to a consumer behavior shift module, which is then taken to a new type of demand forecasting solution, which uses game theory and agent-based modeling. Again, the key here is that there are several factors which affect demand. And if you want to do a total market analysis and impact of one on another, it's important that there is a technology which is holistic in nature, synthesizes that. And that's where we have developed a unique combination of game theory, ABM, and machine learning for demand forecasting, which considers total market interaction and then produces the sale forecast with drivers, the key drivers that are impacting the forecast. Next slide, please. So the solution helps you get to the consumer trends in terms of what choices they may have, what channels they may choose. So the key channels that we are talking about: online or discounters or out of town, convenience stores. There has been a lot of discussion about certain channels gaining prominence at different times for certain types of products. All of these things can be fully understood by using this technology that determines trends, consumer trends in the beginning, and then uses them for granular forecast along channels, formats, and locations. Next slide, please. So it's essentially the need today is that the insight that we are getting about markets and consumers is dynamic. It's not like an aggregate single model, which you do every 3 months or 6 months. It should get insights from all evolving data, from event, search, social policies. We see that there are so many policies that government is now starting, which will have impact. In the times of lockdown, we had policies which retailers came up with, which in terms of how many things you can buy in a basket, or how many times you can buy, or access to online slots and all of that stuff. So a solution that gives you alerts in advance around all of this to understand anomalies, gives you dynamic predictive insight about trends, behavior, gives you the key drivers, the causal factors as to which driver of business and marketing is contributing to the change and to what extent. And then eventually lets you simulate future scenarios, a subject that I'll deal with in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So and do all of this in a manner that doesn't require the business decision makers to do the grunt work of technology. So building a solution that can be directly used by business users, category managers, channel managers, insight managers, consumer market, and finance, and all of that in a very seamless way, considering all the factors and build new scenarios, is the new journey that this type of technology permits, instead of the old inefficient journey of doing it through a modeling team and then reviewing it every 3 months and so on and so forth. It significantly improves time, cost, and quality. Next slide, please. So just to give you a view of it, and this is something that we work with Nielsen with their World Foods data, and just gives the view of what this technology permits. So it has three different parts, where one is consumer trends and market drivers. As you see, the different categories and brands of world food, how they are performing in terms of growth, what is their volume movement. But the most important thing is underlying, which is consumer preference. So in the drop down in the funnel, you could actually choose which brands, and it shows you consumer performance and the drivers. So in this one particular, you can see all of them. Next slide, please. Now this further helps you in building scenarios, which in my opinion today is the best way to arrive at decisions. You use a technology like this to look at all the drivers which you see on the top, and change those drivers and build new scenarios, or predict those drivers and build new scenarios. So if you go to the next slide, Omer, you could, for example, you're seeing two different for Tesco's brands or for Uncle Ben's, multiple scenarios with multiple factors on the slide in the product. Now these help you could actually change even macroeconomic indicators or government policies and build new scenarios. So these scenarios have prediction of market performance, errors, probabilities, all of that, which are very important to arrive at a well-informed decision about what is likely to happen in future. Next slide. Well, we'll skip this. This shows that a certain manufacturer has a certain dip in the performance. Then we can use the tool to get into the details of why is it happening, because we have the drivers, and then how it can be corrected using the scenario simulations. This is actually a live case. We have tried it with multiple FMCG customers. Next slide, please. So this kind of technology and framework gives you a system to use all consumer and context data. Then it uses dynamic consumer trends for granular predictions. And then finally, you could use all of those drivers to predict, simulate scenarios with causal inferences, probabilities, and errors for decision making. So that's, in summary, what I wanted to present, that it's true that the market and consumer preferences have significantly evolved with pandemic. Some of them are short term, some of them are long term. Yet it is possible using the latest technologies and data-based frameworks to take decisions reliably. And one of the technologies that we have developed is here. If you can go to the next slide, Omer. So that's what we have launched, Catman AI, which gives you all of this, an AI-based consumer trends prediction, always on price, promo, and market mix optimization, answering why and how any product will grow the category. We are also working with a customer on prediction of shelf life to minimize food waste and maximizing sales with this. And of course, managing risks and outcome of new product launches. I would stop at that. It's a technology designed for building enterprise predictive competency. The product can scale across. Next slide, please. So to come to the end, I would say that building an AI and data core for business model agility is very important for retailers to improve their performance, for the ones who have been disrupted to revive and survive. And it doesn't require much. The new technology is about the will to adopt and implement it. We have a system that allows you to adopt very easily, and with a vision of a future AI-based solution for omni-channel personalization and collaboration. Next slide, please. This is where I would stop. The pandemic is here to open our eyes to a lot of things, but the fact is the volatility and uncertainty in consumer goods industry has been going on for a long time. And probably this is the best time that when the digital transformation has accelerated and cost control is highest on agenda, a technology like this is adopted and used for building an AI and data core uh, in the industry for revival as well as growth. Thank you very much. And I would pass it back to Cornelio.
Thank you, Sarvesh. It is now the time for questions. Actually, until we receive questions from the audience, I have one question for Russell. Russell, do you have any visibility on which type of e-commerce has grown more? Was it the pure players like Amazon, or e-retailers like Tesco Online, or rather delivery platforms like Uber Eats, Deliveroo, Glovo, and so on?
Yeah, So the ones that we've seen within our read that we're able to look at would be Ocado, done really well in terms of this. They grew really quickly, then kind of hit a plateau because they can only do so much out of a warehouse. So they kind of led the way, and then after that, it was kind of the Tesco's and the Sainsbury's of the world that done really well because they could just convert their stores into click and collect or home delivery. So it was a lot quicker for them to scale up. If you're looking at terms of percentages, then I would say it would be the apps, so Just Eat and Deliveroo's that done really well out of this because they were coming from a really low base. So if you're looking at percentage increase, it would be the apps. But if you're looking in terms of value, the big money, it was the Tesco's, Sainsbury's, and Ocado's that done well out of this.
Yeah, thank you very much, because I think everybody is now investing more and more in e-commerce, and it's interesting to have this kind of information. And I have one question for Sarvesh. Sarvesh, what would be the most important implications on marketing strategy that you see post-COVID?
Well, there are some things which are very clear that, and I would answer this from a data and technology perspective. Marketing strategy has long relied on looking at it as an art and an outcome of experience, which is well justified. However, pandemic has created a scenario when experience is in a short term and a medium term is hugely dependent upon what we can learn from data. So there will be greater adoption of data. There will be greater innovation in artificial intelligence. We ourselves have now further taken up simulations, AI-based simulations, as a new way of understanding consumer and market patterns where live data is not available. Something on the lines of how pandemic itself, infections and deaths have been modeled by epidemiologists because you don't have data, but you use certain technologies to model it. So there will be rapid growth on technologies that can help understand retail market, the complex, uncertain, always evolving retail market, which even AI people had, kept it totally data based. But then there are other aspects. I said in the early part of my presentation that it's three things. We need live data, which is there, but it's not all. We said that it is important to understand consumer psychology because the data that we collect is not enough. What you hear and what they say is not the same. What happens actually. So augmenting our technology and solutions with deep understanding of consumer psychology. Then third, new AI frameworks and solutions that can not only make up for the absence of data by learning from situations, by learning from outcomes, but also ensure that decisions can be optimized at each and every stage, and the whole system can be made more perfect in terms of personalization and collaboration in retail. So I see that marketing strategy will rely a lot more on this, and it will be augmented.
Thank you, Sarvesh. I think we have time for one more question. I think many people are, afraid in terms of investing in AI system and in terms of people requirements and software requirements. Typically, what would be the cost of a Catman AI solution, and would it require extra people to manage it based on your experience?
From my experience and from the strategy we have, this is designed directly for the business user. So CMI, category, finance, revenue, all of them on the consumer goods side as well as on retail side. So we don't expect intermediaries to get involved. In terms of cost, because of the way we have designed, the unit cost of prediction is significantly lower than existing incumbent solutions. So adoption is cheaper and scaling is also at an incremental cost, making it very, very viable for democratizing this solution within the company, whether they are small, mid-size or large, and making it as an enterprise competency.
Okay, thank you very much. So many thanks to all our listeners for your participation, and special thanks, of course, to our speakers. In conclusion, I would say that in a rapidly changing environment, the importance of understanding both underlying causes and having the right data and capabilities are crucial to understand consumer behavior in a VUCA environment. With that being said, thank you once again for your participation, and have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.